Welcome to the season one finale of Laugh Through It All. I'm your host, Tracy. Join me as I talk to Shaylin Hayes Raymond, a counselor, coach, and author about misophonia. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is misophonia? Because so many people don't know what it is.
I want to first say that there is a little bit of confusion even in the scientific community,
Mhm.
but the current research shows that there is a neurophysiological brain basis and that it is activating the fight, flight, freeze section of the brain. So, the evidence we have right now is that it's not a cognitive psychological condition, even though some researchers have tried to propose it is. I don't agree with that. I see more of the neurophysiological basis. And I think, as someone with misophonia, I feel just in general that it's more physical to me than it is psychological because I'll wake up from a dead sleep if there's a trigger. And for people who don't know what misophonia is at all, it's when people have a fight, flight, freeze reaction to otherwise normal sounds or visuals. So, whistling, chewing, pen clicking, sneezing, those are all very common ones, but not exhaustive. And my worst is actually whistling and lawnmowers. And what I was going to say is, it's not psychological. I can be in a dead sleep, and if there's a trigger, I will wake up with my heart rate already elevated. And I mean, that sucks. But I don't think it is psychological. And, we can't just get better by more exposed we are to the sound. Each time is like the first time. And that's actually the nature of this disorder. For, say, anxiety, if you get in the situation over and over, you will start to feel better. But with misophonia, you will feel worse until some people feel sick. They have meltdowns, they have shutdowns, they get migraines. So, a lot of the evidence we have right now does point to it being neurophysiological.
Okay, break that part down for me because I don't know what that means. Neurophysiology. What does that mean?
Well, neuro would be brain,
Brain. Yep. It's yes.
physiological, physically in the brain. It is the physical process of the brain interpreting the sensory stimuli rather than cognition, which happens in a specific part of the brain. This is your actual systems, which are kind of misfiring when they hear it. So the fight, flight, freeze system is acting up, which is a different part of the brain after it hears this sensory stimuli. So these aren't cognitive systems. You'll have a cognitive reaction afterwards where you'll react to the fight flight and feel emotions, fear, anger, disgust, but that comes after this part of your brain is activated.
So do you think then that it does stem from something else, like like is it relate with anxiety or like an OCD or an ADHD thing? Is it related to any of that, do you think?
I would say current evidence points to no, but it's a very difficult question because if you have anxiety or you have OCD or you have depression, that will interact with the misophonia and make it worse. The same as if, you injure your leg and that can cause depression. Like these things can compound on each other, but there are people who have none of those things and have misophonia, and that's already been researched and shown. I think if a person has both, it can change how it interacts. But just that example of anxiety, a person who has anxiety, that's usually based in a thought or a fear, a learned experience. So I am afraid of balloons because a balloon popped in front of me when I was a kid. That's an experience that you have, something you've learned, and you're associating something. I'm not associating chewing or whistling with a bad experience. That happening is the bad experience. There can be absolutely no emotional connections to that whatsoever. I don't have to know the person. I don't have to dislike the person. I could love the person. I could hate them. None of that matters.
So true. So true. So do you think it stems from a trauma or
No.
no? Okay, so because I have misophonia myself. I
Most people, and there was a genetic component that was found, I believe, in the 10M2 gene. And when we go to epigenetics with nature versus nurture, we're now more in a nature via nurture. So think of your genetics as a switchboard. You have these options for the button to go off, but not everyone has that option go off. So you can have two twins that have the same life, similar circumstances, same genetics, but for whatever reason, one of them ends up with a disorder that's like got a genetic component and the other doesn't. Their switchboard went off, the other didn't. They had the same chances, same experiences, but sometimes it just happens in one person. Since a lot of people with misophonia seem to have it very young, like as young as early as they can recognize that they have it, I don't think that lends to a trauma. And honestly, just as a therapist, even interacting with people who have trauma versus people with misophonia, I would say the people with misophonia, honestly, they almost feel guilty because they're like, I've not had a bad life. I've had a great life. Like
Mhm.
things are great. Why do I feel this way? And some do have trauma, obviously, but it's not related to the misophonia. And a lot of people actually express that they feel guilt because they love their family. They want to spend time with their family. They want to enjoy life. Like it's not, it's actually the opposite, where the misophonia is almost like the traumatic experience because it's the thing stopping you.
It's so debilitating. It truly
Yes.
is. Um, because there's so many times where I think, oh my God, I can't go in that room because I know what's going to go on in that room. Or,
Yeah.
I can't go to that sporting event or the movies. The movies is a big one for me. Is everyone around eating popcorn? You know what I mean?
We
It's like,
actually went to the movies 2 weeks ago, but we went to a drive in. And it
okay.
was absolutely amazing. We were
Yeah.
alone in our own car. I had a jacket covering the people outside the window. Oh my God, it was such a beautiful situation. I'm not triggered by chewing, so he could have snacks. That was fine.
Yeah.
But I am triggered by like visuals like legs shaking, or, if someone's got their phone dinging. And people act horrible in theaters nowadays, I swear.
Oh
Like
yeah.
they have no concept of what's going on. So yeah, I do certainly find misophonia impacts my life a lot. It's the reason I work from home, why I'm a therapist online. I switched to online school because university just became impossible. And I would say it touches every facet of life. And I do think that it's more in the neurodivergent sphere, where our brains and our bodies are just interacting with the world differently than someone else maybe.
And now that you say that, like I feel like mine's getting worse as I get older also.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's a thing, but if I think back to college classes, I can remember people would come into to the at night because I would go at night after I worked, and
Hmm.
people would sit in there and eat like a bag of chips or something, and
Hmm.
I almost got to the point where I felt like I have to let the teacher know that I can't come to this class because this person sitting next to me is eating chips every class. And so
Yeah.
I have those types of memories from years ago. And I don't think I would have said that I had that years ago. But just when you said that, it reminded me that I did have that. So, but I do feel like it's getting worse as I get older.
I would say that it more waxes and wanes, and Dr. Jennifer Jo Brown has said the same thing. It can depend on your tolerance in the situation. It could just be as you're older that you have more responsibilities, you're spending more time with people, you have more things on your plate, your nervous system's more taxed, maybe you're not sleeping as much as you used to be able to. So I don't necessarily think that age is the factor so much as lifestyle changes.
So it's not that I'm getting worse. It's just the environment's changing around me.
Like you may have reacted the same way when you were 20 if you were in the situation you are now.
Okay. Yeah, because I've noted, and I was just talking about this with my aunt, because my aunt has exactly the same
Hmm.
triggers as I do. Mine is definitely, chewing with their mouth open or popping,
Hmm.
snapping gum. Um, Nail biting is probably my worst, is seeing people, and but that's a to me that's like a visual one also, because you don't
Hmm.
hear them doing it. If I see someone doing it, then it immediately starts.
Yeah.
And why, a big question I have is, why do I go from feeling okay, see you, but just put your finger in your mouth, and you go from 0 to I can't take it immediately. There is no in between. There's no, oh my God, it's going to get worse. It's from one drastic part to another.
Well, let me give you a scenario that we can relate it to that has to do with safety and fight, flight, and fear. Our fight flight system is our natural response to things that could harm us. It's a survival response. In people with misophonia, it's not serving us in the best of way. It's going off at wrong time. So imagine that you are walking down the street. You're having a great day. It's beautiful out. Things are great. You're enjoying yourself. And suddenly someone walks up to you and pulls a knife. How quickly will you be upset and in fear?
Right.
Are you
Immediately.
going to slowly build up to that? No. So, in you, basically, our brains, every time, as silly as this may sound, every time someone chews something, every time someone does a trigger, to our brain, they might as well have a knife.
Yes. But
And
you
it's immediate.
yeah.
It happens within milliseconds, like so quickly that cognition could not be involved at all because it is so quick and it's so innate. And I think any person, if you pull a knife on them, they're not thinking first, they're feeling fear.
Ooh, I like that. Yes. Yes.
The thinking comes later, and
Yeah.
it will. But when you're caught off guard by something that's actually scary, your first react is shock. It's maybe a gasp, it's tensing up, it's that physiological feeling. And unfortunately, for those of us with misophonia, that can happen if someone clicks a pen. And I do want to impress upon people that yes, it sounds dramatic. Yes, it sounds
I know.
it, but it does feel just that bad, if not worse. Like if anything, I'm underplaying how it feels because it's so hard to explain just how
I agree.
disorienting it is.
Yes. Like you've got, and like you said, that flight, like you want to run and get out of there as soon as possible. And it's,
Yeah. Or, you could end up angry. You could be like, why
yes.
does this person doing this to me? Why are they so rude? Why are they doing this? But those reactions after are your cognition trying to understand what's physiologically happening to you. It's like your brain's trying to come up with a story for what's going on. And that's actually where, when working with clients, or even in my book on misophonia, where I really impress upon the point that's the stuff you can change. You can change kind of how you cognitively react to it. But I also point out to people, you can't stop that moment from happening. That moment's going to happen no matter what. But you can influence how you react afterward and kind of work with that story.
Okay. Yeah, because most people think, like my brother is a big nail biter. My dad's a big nail biter, and my dad understands it, and he definitely tries to, because for him,
Hmm.
he's not even, he'll say, "I'm not biting my nails, I'm biting the skin." I'm like, it's not the point. It's just, it's just that.
Yeah.
There's something about it. Where my brother will be like, "Well, just don't look at me," and I'm thinking, okay, but you just don't understand. Like, how can you get someone to understand?
Well,
I think
let's go
my
back to that analogy.
coworkers, huh?
Let's go back to that analogy. If someone pulls a knife on you, what if that guy says, well, just don't look at the knife I'm holding up to your chest?
Right.
Was that going to work?
Yeah, I just don't think people, and I can't control that because this
Yeah.
really isn't as known. I mean, thankfully I know about it and I understand it, and well, I mean, I understand
Hmm.
what it is. I understand that I have it, and that helps me explain it to some people. Like I do think my coworkers are really good about it, because a lot of them
Hmm.
do know, and they'll even say, they're like, you may not want to go in there. It's, there's all kinds of noises and and things like that that you may not be good with. So I think they understand more, but it's
Hmm.
hard to explain how how it hurts. It literally physically hurts us. That's hard to
Mhm.
explain to people who don't believe it's true.
Yeah, I've expressed that. And this is actually a big problem I have with peers in the clinical space who don't have it, who are trying to help people, because there's always that disconnect. And I'm not saying you can't help people if you don't have it, but there's always that disconnect where they don't, no matter how empathetic a person is, no matter how much they care about the person, they can never understand the level of distress that we are talking about. And it does sound dramatic and it does sound
Yep.
like we're overblowing it. Like, if you didn't understand it, you would think that this person is just making this up, because it does sound absurd. But I mean, the more we can lend our voices to this, that no, like, I'm a relatively reasonable person. I have a
Right.
master's in counseling
Yes.
psychology.
Yeah.
And this, when I'm triggered, I'll be like in my room crying, like,
Right.
just completely, if it's too much, it's too much. And there's no amount of logic that can tell your brain that you're okay when you're physiologically in fight flight.
Hmm. Why do you think there's such a difference in from person to person on the different sounds? Or what triggers
There
them?
really isn't. There really isn't. There's about 20 some sounds that are common. I've never heard somebody have a sound that's not on that list.
Oh,
It
okay,
just
so
seems to be
give
a
me some of
different
those.
whistling, chewing, sneezing,
Oh, yeah, you said that.
coughing, like crinkling paper,
Mm,
shuffling feet, flip flops, like a clacking sound. Uh, some people like water dripping, just like a single drip,
yeah.
a clock ticking. Ugh. I've refused to go back to places just because they have a clock. The visuals are a bit different because the reaction, we don't necessarily know if it's the same or if it's similar but related. I personally think that, we have one sensory system, so they're probably related, but I'm simply not going to comment on that without actual research, because I'm a very evidence based person. And if I don't have a clear understanding, I'm not going to kind of make one up. But I do think they are probably related just based on how we interact with the world. And there is research that shows that we hear with our eyes and we see with our ears. So if you have deficits in one hearing, your brain will pick up other parts. So I think that is a strong indicator that they're related. But as for those sounds, yeah, I've worked with numerous clients who have misophonia. I've been an advocate for 10 years. I've interviewed people for books. I've talked, misophonia is my whole life
I
through and
love it.
through, but
Yes.
I've never once had someone tell me that they're triggered by something and I said, "Oh, I've never heard that before."
Okay.
Never. Not a single time.
Hmm.
I've heard people say they only have one. I've seen people have all of them. I've seen people have a mix and a different mix, but it's never been different sounds. And that's actually something I found very curious. I'm actually doing a machine learning study to look at these sounds and what's like similar to them, because I do find that fascinating that, yeah, I've never had someone be like, "Oh, I'm triggered by this random thing." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" Not once.
Right. So if my kids have a little bit of this now too, is that because of me?
As a learned behavior?
And it's different sounds. Their problem with some of the sounds isn't the same as mine, but I see some of the things that they have and I thought, God, do they only have these issues because they are, they hear my issues, if that makes sense.
I
Like they
would
don't have a
think,
problem with people chewing or biting their nails, but they've got their own little
is
thing.
it your fault that they have a certain hair color?
Well, no, but you know what I mean. Like my daughter can't like if you do this, just if I just went like this to my nail, I can't hear that, but she hears it. She can hear it from across the room.
I don't think it's something you could learn or catch. You're either going into a physiological fight flight or you're not. What I do think is it's more likely that they have it because they're genetically linked to you. They have the same DNA. So the fact that your brain can fire a different way, so can theirs. I don't think it's, they learned it, because there's people with kids with misophonia who the kid has absolutely no symptoms and is just going through life perfectly fine. The same as, some kids will inherit autism, some won't, some will inherit, even mental conditions can be physiological too, in that sense. So I honestly don't think that it's a learned behavior. Now, could someone who doesn't have misophonia be more acutely aware of a sound? Yes. I've seen that in my parents or my husband. They'll notice triggers before me because they have a learned association of that sound with that's going to hurt her. But they are not going into fight, flight, freeze the same way. They are having a cognitive reaction that this sound bugs the person I love. That's bad. But they're not in fight, flight. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Right. Okay. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because I worry about that. I'm thinking, oh gosh, you poor thing. You're just like your mom.
I don't think you can teach them it. I think at a certain degree you can, accommodate more and do things that leads to less likelihood of maladaptive coping mechanisms, which could lead to misophonia being less severe.
Mhm.
So I think you can impact it either negatively or positively. If, like, your child has misophonia and you say you have to eat at the table with us no matter what, I think that's going to have
Sure.
negative.
Sure.
Whereas if you're understanding, I think it's one of those things where the impact you have is based on reactions, not causing their initial response.
Okay. How have you seen misophonia affect relationships, whether it be, I mean, any relationship? What are some common?
It affects absolutely every part of your life that you can imagine: sleep, school, work, friendship, relationships. However, I will say that the misophonia is not the only issue there. If
Oh,
someone is kind, loving, and respecting, they're usually more empathetic, they're more likely to learn. And I've noticed that relationship issues with misophonia, in my experience, don't relate from the misophonia. It's usually the person having some kind of, sometimes it's a personality disorder, sometimes it's a resentment, but most people who are empathetic and kind, in the beginning they might not get it, but they'll start to see you reacting and realize that, you're going through this, and they'll kind of change. But I think honestly it depends just if that person genuinely cares about you. And I know my husband does care. He's made so many adjustments, and sure, he'll still get annoyed sometimes, but
right.
whereas I've dated people that were like, that's weird, I don't believe you, and it's like, that's an issue like deeper than the misophonia itself, I think, because that's a lack of understanding and respect.
I know I went on a
And I
date.
will say, with coworkers,
Yes.
that's an absolute throw out the window. If they don't get it, they don't get it. You can't control that.
Right. Right. My mom totally understands it. My mom gets it.
Mhm.
I mean, if anybody in my life has gotten it from the beginning, she understands it. She has helped navigate it with like my dad, like biting his nails and things like that. And so all along, she has known that I'm not crazy. This is just something that's hard for me. And so
Mhm.
that always feels good when people don't think you're crazy because you already feel
Yeah.
crazy. I feel crazy in my own self when that stuff like that happens. What are some of like the emotional tolls that it does take on people? I mean, like we talk about like isolation or guilt, shame. What are some things there?
I mean, I've unfortunately talked to people who it's caused divorces, it's caused problems with family members where a family member, doesn't believe. This is especially in teenagers where it's really bad if one parent doesn't understand. Unfortunately, that can really tarnish the relationship because a parent might see it as behavioral. And it might not even be that parent's fault. They could just be going to a practitioner who doesn't understand it, who thinks, okay, your kid has a behavior problem, don't indulge it. And unfortunately, that can do a lot of damage where it ruins the relationship because they're not understanding each other and one is hurting the other, even if they're doing it out of love. Like in some cases, you know, you can get bad advice but act on it with the best of intentions.
Mhm.
So I think that can happen too, where people will just not understand that it's, not OCD. And with OCD, exposure therapy is considered the gold standard, but with misophonia, exposure makes us worse. So I think
Imagine.
it can impact relationships even if people have the best of intentions.
So is misophonia now like a diagnosis that is known and doctors use it? Is it, you know,
It
no
is not in
thing?
any diagnostic manual, but it has enough research to show that it does exist.
Okay, and you said you've been researching it for 10 years. I didn't even realize that it's even that old, so to speak.
Well, the term misophonia itself was first coined in 2001 by two
Okay, wow.
doctors, a husband and wife, and they are audiologists, and they noted that it was different from hyperacusis and tinnitus. But sensory research goes back even further, back to the 1970s when Dr. Jane Ayres was looking at sensory integration and over responsive people who react to stimuli like sound and visuals has been studied back to the 1970s. We're in a unfortunate position where these researchers don't seem to be marrying it all together and looking at the other research. But there is a plethora of research that shows that, this is not a new phenomenon. This has been studied for quite some time. And it not being in a diagnostic manual, I think, is more an issue of politics and how much rigorous science needs to exist for something. I don't think it's necessarily that the evidence doesn't exist, it's that they want very specific studies with very specific showings to get their criteria. And it's also kind of in a rock and a hard place where what manual do you put it in?
Mhm.
There is movement from So Quiet, and we also supported them as well at the International Misophonia Foundation to get it in the International Disease Manual. I can't think of the actual name. It's the ICD 11, International Classification of Diseases. I think that's right, but don't quote me. Um, but there's this question of I'm Canadian, so we don't really, therapists here can't even diagnose unless you're like doctoral level. And we don't do insurance, so we don't really rely on diagnosis as much as an American system. But in the American system, there's also a question if misophonia is not psychiatric or psychological, what manual does it even go in? Because even if we have lots of research saying that it's a disorder, it exists, it's causing a reaction, that doesn't mean that it's causing a psychological reaction or a psychiatric reaction. So it probably doesn't even belong in the DSM. And if it does, where does it fit? I'm not sure if it's under any of the categories in the DSM. The closest I would say would probably be neurodevelopmental. But even then, I don't know if that's necessarily true. And I'm not necessarily sure if the lack of diagnosis is a lack of science or if it's simply that there just isn't necessarily a place for it yet.
The sensory integration part is interesting because I would have never, I mean, I teach special needs kids. I know quite a bit about sensory integration and I never put those together. It's weird that does fit.
I personally use a sensory approach, which I learned a lot from Dr. Jennifer Broad, and she worked with Dr. Lucy Miller from the SPD Foundation. And I do personally see a lot of value in a sensory
Sure.
perspective. I think that occupational therapy and sensory diets can be very helpful because they can deal with that physiological aspect and the cognitive stuff kind of for, as I said, that moment after, not during. And I personally do believe that there is a huge sensory component.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me now. And after talking to you, that definitely makes sense. So what are some treatment options if, even for myself, if I wanted to get some treatment for this, what does that look like?
Well, I'm going to first say that I don't personally call it treatment because I feel like that has a connotation of a cure.
Okay.
And I would say, I mean, my approach is just as I said, psychoeducation first, learning what's going on. I take an advocacy based approach where accommodations, negotiations, communication, all those skills are taught because I do feel like there's a certain degree that can't change until you're able to communicate with others and create an environment that has, a lower threshold to the point where you can cope with more. And, you know, the sensory diet for trying to lower the thresholds and keep yourself from getting too overstimulated. And then the cognitive part so that you're not like sitting there ruminating and ruining the good moments.
Yes. Yeah, because I know I do that. You're waiting for it. You're waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate that you can sometimes, be worried about it when it's not even happening and it can kind of seep into other parts.
So there's no, okay, so you talked about, the anxiety portion of it, or so even if it's not considered that, so no anxiety, because I always assumed it was part of anxiety.
Mhm.
And so an anxiety med or anything like that won't take the edge off of it or won't help you with that at all.
In my experience, you'll have misophonia no matter what drugs you're on.
Right.
And I don't want to say this in a bad way, but I've tried a lot of them.
Yeah.
But I've tried them for, I also have OCD, which does need medication. And I am currently medicated for OCD, which is the highest dose of anxiety medication that you can possibly have. And I still have misophonia. No medication that can
Right.
help misophonia that we know of.
Okay. So you really it really doesn't ever go away. It's just you need to learn how to
It's kind of about learning to live with it. Yeah. And I know that can be hard for some people to hear, but
it
I
is.
do think that there's a lot of hope there because there's a lot more research than there used to be. There's, it's not like when I started 10 years ago, if I mentioned misophonia to someone in my day to day life, they'd look at me like I had three heads. But
Right.
now more people are accepting, they're willing to listen, and there's more actual research and there's money going to research. So, drug trials could happen at some point. So, we're in a much better place than we used to be, and it is going much faster than even I expected. So, I do have a lot of hope there.
And just the word misophonia in general, is it the fear? It's the fear of noises. Is that what the actual word means?
See, this is something that I'm not known for liking. I think the name is not a good descriptor because from the Latin word, it does mean hatred of sound. So misophonia, hatred, sound. So just like
Okay.
someone's a misogynist,
Mm,
hatred, women.
gotcha.
Um, I think it's an oversimplistic way to explain it. And I think that also goes back to the communities aren't talking. And I don't think if sensory research had been respected the way it should be, that we would have ever got the term misophonia, because I think we would still be looking at it as overstimulation in that sense. And at this point, I see it as it's the word people understand and choose, and it's useful simply because people have associated it with this. But in general, I don't think that necessarily is a great word, but a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. Like it's just a word to describe it. I don't think it's like
Right.
a literal word.
So, what would be a piece of advice that you would give? Say, if let's just take me for example, if I'm in a big setting and I see somebody getting a bag of chips out, what is something I could immediately do to help me calm myself before I go from 0 to 100? What are just a couple tips that I could use?
I mean, four square breathing could be useful because it does have a physiological effect on the body. So, any breathing exercises, tension balls like stress balls, basically anything that physiologically brings your heart rate down. Because the lower your heart rate is, the less likely you are to feel like a severe reaction.
Okay. I also which I'm sure you've heard of. I use it's called the Loop earplugs.
Mhm.
Have you heard of those?
Yeah, I personally don't find them helpful for myself. I know some
Okay,
people do find them helpful, but for me, it's either there's a trigger sound or there's not. The
right.
loop doesn't stop enough sound for me to really feel like it's enough. The only thing I find that like truly gets rid of the sound is active noise canceling earbuds. And they don't even have to be expensive. Like you can get a $40 pair on Amazon. And I will say, like, I say this a lot, decibel doesn't matter. The loudness of a trigger is not related to how bad it is. I could hear something way off in the distance and it's still there.
Right. Yeah, it helps me in times where like before, like if I have them in before. So if I'm going to
Yeah.
a sporting event and I haven't been made visual awareness or I haven't already heard it. So I can put it in first and then, then with the noise and everything, I'm not focused on I don't hear all the crowd. I hear the one person eating sunflower
Hmm.
seeds 3 rows behind me. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it has helped me with that. It kind of takes away the intensity of some things. Or even at school, hall duty. When I'm doing hall duty, sometimes the metal water bottles dropping on the floor, like it takes away that sting because it goes, I mean, once it hits you, it kind of like goes directly to your
Hmm.
brain. And so,
Well, that is a physical change in the sound. What it sounds like is you're dampening the sharpness of the sound.
get that for sure.
So you are physically changing how the sound
How it
sounds.
right.
But I also think it could be when we look at the sensory diet, one reason it can work is perceived comfort. So the fact that you're putting it in beforehand and feel better could also be that you feel safe. You have a tool, you're not as alert. So if you don't have them in, your brain is like scanning. Do I hear sunflower seeds? Do I hear sunflower seeds? What am I going to hear? What's going to
Oh my
happen?
gosh,
But if
that's
you
so
have them in, you feel like you're safe and like you're less likely to be alert beforehand. It's not changing what's in the environment, but it's changing your reaction to kind of alertness. Because if you walk into a room that you can hear a pin drop, I'm sure your first thought is, what am I going to hear? But if you walk into a room that has like music or something, you don't hear the little things. It's like that layer of protection.
oh, I like that a lot. Yeah, it's a comfort for me. You're right.
I hate silent places more than anything. Like the worst thing for someone with misophonia than a loud room is a silent room because it's everything, every little sound is amplified. And it's just, I'll be sitting here and like my husband, I'll be in like a pose, it'll be quiet. And then he'll like do something and completely innocent, like just living his life. But like he'll go and say, like, start doing the dishes. And I'll suddenly hear it and I'll just jump. And I'm like, it's not even a trigger at that point, but I'm like, why is there a sound? What is
Yeah.
it? And I have to like evaluate, is this a bad sound? Is this a good sound? And it's like exhausting because people don't understand that it's not necessarily just the sounds that are triggers that are exhausting. You are constantly having to evaluate whether or not that stimuli is safe.
Oh, you're so dead on. That is so right. And it's
Only because
bad.
it tortures me daily.
Yeah, I mean, but
It's
to hear
experience.
other people have the same issues and feel it the same way. You know what I mean? It's nice.
Yeah.
It's nice for someone who suffers from it and have no one to talk to about it because they don't
Mhm.
deal with the same things. And so people don't understand how
I think I
really
am fortunate where I'm in the advocacy position for so
sure.
long that I know lots of people with misophonia.
Yes.
So to me, it's oh, I dropped my earbud. To me, it's normal at this point because I know so many people who have it.
Right. What do you
There
think
was
are
a time when
some
it wasn't, though.
Oh, absolutely. What do you think are some misconceptions about misophonia?
Probably that it's just OCD or it's a behavior problem or it's all in their head or they're looking for attention. I think that's just silly. If I wanted attention, there'd be far better ways to get it.
Right. Isn't that the
Like I'd
truth?
go dance half naked on top of a car. I'd get so much more attention. Actually, if anything, I want the opposite of attention. I want to not notice things and be left alone. So I do think that's a huge misconception. And honestly, I think there's just a lack of understanding and awareness that it does exist. It's getting better, I think. But also, I see even with people who are empathetic and who do care, where they'll be like, well, I just made the sound one time. Why are you reacting? Like, I'm not doing it over and over. And like, they don't understand that every time's like the first time. And so, even people who really care can just kind of get a little frustrated now and then because they're like, didn't we just go through this like yesterday? You know, I'm not trying to hurt you. Like, I didn't mean to make it. Can we just get over it? And I get why, like, that impacts them. I'm not saying that they're wrong to feel these
Right.
emotions about it, but I think it can be hard for people to realize that every single time is like the first time. And even if it's only once, even if it's small, even if no harm was meant, our fight, flight, freeze reaction doesn't know that.
Oh, that every time is like the first time is so dead on. 'Cause it is. It's it's not like, "Oh, here it is again." It's like, "Oh my god." It is every single time is like the first time.
Yeah.
And you do feel bad because sometimes, you know, you're making people probably feel bad about how they're eating or the noises
Mhm.
that they make when they eat, and you're not doing it to be hurtful or to make them feel
Well,
bad.
no one likes criticism or feeling
Right.
like they're being accused of something. So then
Right.
their fight flight goes off. And that's why I always say never explain misophonia to someone while you're triggered because you are going to be aggressive. I'm not saying like
It
violently aggressive, but like your body language will set them off in the fight flight. And then you just got a loop of two people in fight flight who aren't understanding each other, who both feel attacked. And that's something I like to impress upon people that, you know, just because the other person doesn't have misophonia, that doesn't mean that you're not going to put them in a fight flight by your misophonia.
right, because you don't know what their trigger is of something different.
Well, not even their trigger. It's very, very normal to have a reaction when
Mhm.
someone is upset. So they could just be reacting to your body language. They could see your stiffness. They could hear your tone of voice. It can just be like those subtle differences that, like, I'm sure you know if like your kid is upset, whether they tell you or not.
Mhm.
So we can interact with people on a lower level than cognition where we're both reacting based on our own nervous systems, and instead of getting to that communication level you're just reacting instead of communicating, which is why I think a big part of this is negotiation and communication and breaking that apart and being able to say, okay, I'm not angry at you, the sound is causing a fight flight, I'm not mad at you, but we have to do something because I can't stay in this situation.
Yeah, I like that, and I do like the being able to put in a perspective of the fight or flight because I think everybody understands what that means, and so if
Mhm.
you put it together with how you're feeling, I think that that takes it to another level of understanding for them.
Yeah, and that is something that has been shown in studies. It has a brain basis. It is activating the
Yes.
amygdala, which is the fight flight center of the brain. Regardless of any form of diagnosis, we do know that this is causing fight flight. So that is something that you could really go with because it is pretty much the one verified fact we do have.
So before I go, why don't you plug your book? Tell us about your book.
Which one? No.
You tell us about all of them.
Well, there's Full of Sound and Fury, but that one I don't really suggest as much. I wrote that in 2015 and updated it in 2021. Um, Misophonia Matters came out, I think, in 2024. And that is more my coping skills book. It also has a workbook. And I will say that I'm the director of the International Misophonia Foundation, and we do research, we provide coping skills. And if anybody is interested, I do provide counseling in Canada and coaching for misophonia worldwide. So I do offer my coping skills program that way, or through the book if you want just like an easily digestible way. There's also an on-demand class because I think, not everybody wants to commit to long sessions or even has the time. So I've tried to add variability.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much for doing this. Again, this is near and dear to my heart, and I wish I
Well,
wasn't
thank you for
this
having me.
way. Absolutely. And I really, my goal is to hope that
I
people
wish
become
no one
more
was this
aware.
way. I've said, and I mean it truly, that I would not wish this on my worst enemy. Like,
No,
not even my worst enemy,
I
because
agree.
it's that cruel.
I agree. It really is. And
And I
with
think that says
this,
a lot.
yeah, it is because I don't think people understand how painful it can be because it really is.
Hmm.
It hurts. It's
Yes.
a true pain. So, yeah,
Mind, body, and soul. All of
yeah.
them.
So I hope that at least someone hears this and first of all could maybe understand what's going on with them or they
Mhm.
know someone because I think we all have somebody in our life that deals with this. So hopefully someone will get a little help from just listening to us today. Thank you for watching this season. Join me in the fall for season 2. As always, do better, expect better, and be better, and remember to laugh through it all. Don't forget to check out my Shopify page where you can pick up some do better, expect better, and be better, and some laugh through it all merchandise. Link is in the description.